Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel and hand lettering series. In the last video, we covered our uppercase brush letters. In this video, we're going to start learning bounce lettering. This is a really highly requested video, so I'm really excited to share this one with you guys. So we're going to start getting a little bit more creative with our lettering and our designs. If you guys like this video, make sure to click the thumbs up below and don't forget to subscribe to my channel to keep up with all of my latest videos. As usual, I will have worksheets down in the description or linked down in the description for you guys so that you can print them out and practice and practice and practice until you guys become hand lettering pros. So now let's get into learning bounce lettering. Before we get started on the bounce lettering part, I just wanted to talk to you about one of the tips that I found really helpful whenever I start doing my hand lettering. And I originally was going to do a video talking about the different tips I have, but I feel like this is probably the only real helpful tip I can offer. I think a lot of learning brush lettering is just practice, but I do have a really good tip that I wanted to show you guys, as I said. And that is that you want to try to lift your pen between each letter or each stroke. And I found that really helpful in keeping my letters more consistent, or my downstrokes more consistent, as well as those thin upstrokes, which can be difficult for people. And I've had a few people tell me, you know, help me. I don't know what to do. I'm trying and I just can't keep my upstrokes thin and even. So what my tip is, like I said, is to lift your pen in between each letter or stroke. So let's do a longer word because those are the ones that are more difficult. And I'm going to do September. So I'm going to show you just trying to do it without lifting my pen. And this is not going to be bounce because we're going to move on to that once I show you this. Now I'm having trouble even doing it without lifting my pen now because I'm so used to it. Not only is it easier to get through the entire word with more even strokes, but it just helps you form your letters that much better. So that was without lifting. It's not bad. It's not bad, but watch what happens when you lift your pen after each stroke. Our S is just going to be one stroke, and then you'll stop here, like that. Then you're going to move on to E, and you'll start your E where you would if you were just practicing your letters as individual letters. And M is a perfect example of one that you'll be lifting after each stroke instead of after the letter, for all those reasons I already mentioned. So down, one stroke, and you can go second stroke, and then your third stroke for that letter, and then back up. Same thing with B. You can lift your pen there. And then R is a similar idea. So you come up, stroke down, finish here, and then your R, when you lift your pen in between these two strokes here, so your loop, and then you do your last stroke separately, your R just ends up looking that much better. Alright, so now that I've done both, not lifting my pen and lifting my pen, you can see how this word just looks a little bit more consistent all the way through, where when I'm trying to do the whole letter, the angle of your pen starts to change and your hand starts to get tired from just a consistent motion. You can see how my lines start to get much thicker in through here, and even the same size in my upstrokes and downstrokes, and very squiggly, and my E's aren't even a consistent shape. If you look down here, you can just see that my upstrokes are distinctive from my downstrokes. They're all thin. My downstrokes are all thick. My E's are a much more consistent shape. and this word just overall looks a lot nicer and a lot better executed than without lifting my pen. So if you guys are having trouble with consistency and your hand getting tired, that's my biggest tip for improving your brush lettering. Lift your pen in between each letter or each stroke. Try it out, let me know if it works for you, and just keep practicing. So now that I've shown you guys that, let's get on to the bounce lettering part, which is so much fun. Since not everybody watching this video will know what bounce lettering is, let me explain it for those of you who maybe don't, or maybe just want to understand it a little bit better. So bounce lettering is taking your brush letters or any other type of hand lettering, and instead of having your letters mostly run across your baseline, which is where most of your letters sit unless they have descenders, what you're going to do is certain letters in your word, you're going to break that baseline and stagger them slightly below the baseline, so in between the baseline and your descender line. So you're going to stagger your letters on that line to create a bouncing effect to your letters. So I'll show you an example right here that I did. So this is not bounced. So same idea as this one here. And then this version is bounced. So you can see how here all my letters line up against this baseline. And then on this one, the baseline is right here. It runs along this line here. And I break that baseline and stagger my letters to create a sort of bouncing uneven effect. And that is purely just a style thing. It creates a little bit more fun aesthetic to your words, and it's very popular and very common practice in brush lettering. And sometimes you'll want to use the bounce to fill in gaps in the spacing of words, like this example here. So I went ahead and I bounced September as I did right here, and then I put is here because September is here. And you can see that I did bounce these words as well, and I tried to stick to the guidelines I will explain in a couple minutes, but I also tried to be aware of the space that is left under September by bouncing those letters, and I tried to use my bounce technique to fill in those little gaps to create a sort of even aesthetic throughout this design. So that is one of the other reasons why people use bounce lettering. Now you might be asking, well, do you only bounce the bottom of your words? Can you bounce the top? Yes, bounce lettering does occur on the tops of your words as well. I haven't really done it too much on these words. The only letters that I really have bounced above the X height, which is the midpoint of your letters where most of your letters sit. So this line here is your X height. And I've explained the terminology in other videos. If you haven't watched my other videos, then I recommend you go back and look at those, and you can learn a lot of the terminology in those videos. I'll have that linked in the cards and in the description as well. But yes, you can sometimes break that X height as well, and you'll often do it just regularly with your R's, and you'll also do it with your O's. So those letters just kind of break that X height anyhow. But yes, you can bounce your letters above the X height as well. Now, bounce lettering is a lot about being creative and a lot about trial and error and a lot about really creating your own style when it comes to your hand lettering. But there are a few sort of rules or guidelines. I like to call them guidelines because even within those rules, you will have to make exceptions and break the rules, just like we do with bounce lettering, because essentially bounce lettering is breaking the rules. You learn the rules first, which you can do in my previous videos in this playlist. So you want to learn the rules, practice the rules, get really good at them, and then you come to bounce lettering where you're breaking those rules. So let's discuss some of those guidelines. Now, when creating bounce lettering, you're really going for a sort of even aesthetic. even though you'll try to bounce every second letter, but that can't always happen. So really what you're going for is an even aesthetic, an even look. And you can see what I mean here with September. This is bounced, not bounced, bounced. And this one is slightly bounced just to sort of break up this line that's being created here and to create that sort of even effect. So I don't bounce the E and then I bounce my M. I do bounce my B. I don't bounce my E here. And my R, of course, has a bounce on top as it normally does anyways, and then bounces below that X height for the R. So it creates an even aesthetic, but it's not every second letter or every second stroke. That is sort of what you try to do, but you can't. You can't just always bounce every second letter because there's certain letters that just don't bounce very well. So let's go over that. So I've got my letters grouped here in a way that I think makes sense. Well, this is the way that I see it and the way that I like to explain it, and I feel like this is a solid way to learn, is that if you look at these letters down here that I'm calling the more bounceable letters, in comparison to these letters that I would say you won't bounce about 95% of the time, you can see that these letters here sit on the baseline, or they hit the baseline at only one spot. And that spot where they hit the baseline is in an undercurve, which is what you call a curve that goes down and comes up. That's called an undercurve. And that doesn't make for a very bounceable letter. What makes a really good bounceable letter is a letter that can hit the baseline only once, but it hits the baseline once in a downstroke, like an I. Now the rest of these letters within this group that are bounceable, you'll notice they either have an undercurve with a downstroke or just several downstrokes. So those letters, as you can see, hit the baseline more than once, and that creates a really great letter for bouncing because it has two spots where it hits that baseline and you bounce on the second stroke that hits that baseline. And then M for me is a little bit unique. I don't know if everybody bounces their M's like this, but this is how I like to bounce my M's, and that is because it hits the baseline 3 times, and normally you would bounce on this second stroke. I like to start my bounce on that second stroke, but I'll bounce halfway to that normal spot where I would bounce my letters, and then on that third stroke I'll bounce all the way down just to create a little bit more of a flow rather than only bouncing on the last one. And that's just how I like to do it. That's my style. So now let's look at these letters. These letters are also letters that you won't typically bounce, but I have these guys grouped together because I feel like they are somewhat of more of an exception to the not bouncing rule. Now the reason why you won't mostly bounce these letters here is because if you notice, these letters all have descenders, and when it comes to a descender, they already go past that line where you would bounce your letters, so they already kind of have a built-in bounce to them, so you wouldn't go ahead and bounce them even farther. They already have a bounce. So you won't normally bounce these letters. Now, going back to that question, can you bounce letters above the X height? And I said, yes, you can. So this is the reason why I call these guys exceptions, because though you won't bounce them breaking that baseline, you can bounce them to break that X height line. And that's what I've done here. And as you can see here, how we bounce these letters is we bounce on the ball of the letter, and we keep this stroke here at that X height line. So you're going to bounce the top of that ball, and you can see all those letters do that. Now, I haven't included the J down here in this exception because I feel like the J is one of those letters that they just don't need to be bounced because it has a descender line, but it also has a dot on top, which is also known as a tittle. That's a weird word. So it already automatically bounces on top. So J doesn't need a bounce. And then Y is a little bit unique, and you can follow the same rule as we do with the rest of these descender letters, where you bounce that first stroke that hits the X height. So here you can see I bounced that first stroke that hits the X height, and this stroke sits at the X height as normal. Or you can do it the opposite way, where you keep this line or this stroke at the X height and then bounce this side. And then the last exception to these letters is Z or Z, because there's two different ways to do a Z or a Z. And if you're doing it like this, then all you're going to do is break that X height by going above on your overturn stroke. And if you're doing a Z or Z like this, then you're just going to bounce it in a normal way. And that's why it's grouped in with the exceptions and the extremely bounceable letter set. I guess that's what I'll call it. So those are all of your bounce letters, the reasons why you won't bounce certain letters, the reasons why these ones are very bounceable letters, and the reasons why these descender letters are exceptions. So now that we've discussed what bounce lettering is, and we've discussed why certain letters are more bounceable than others, let's actually take a look at bouncing some words for practice. So now let's first do a word that I think is a very easy word to bounce. September is actually a pretty easy word to bounce, but we already used September for an example, so let's try something else. Let's try the word dreaming. Sometimes you'll start your bounce on the first letter, and sometimes you'll start your bounce on the second letter. I feel like I will often bounce the first letter in most cases. So when it comes to dreaming, we're going to bounce the D. So we're going to go up, and then down stroke, and then up, and then I'm going to lift my pen, reload my pen, and then down stroke, and then I'm going to bounce the D. And I'm going to come up, reload my pen, and then down stroke. So when you lift your pen, that's, as I said, that's always a good time to reload. So there you can see I made the decision not to bounce my R because I already bounced my D. And then E is one of those letters that most of the time we won't be bouncing. So E and A you can bounce. And you won't always bounce those bounceable letters. You'll have to make a decision based on the design you're doing and what's going to look even. So you'll want to probably practice your words as you go. Before you start putting your words on something like cards or anything like that, give a little practice try to your words to see which letters bounce best in that scenario. So we're going to bounce our A, and then because M hits the bass line in 3 spots, I will bounce that letter, where normally if it was a different letter that bounced right here beside this bounce, I probably wouldn't. So I'll show you what I mean. So it doesn't bounce on the first stroke, and I like to bounce mine like halfway on this second stroke, so down to there, and then all the way on that third stroke. So if it was a different letter other than M that was beside an already bounced A, I'd probably choose not to bounce. Like say if it was a V, I probably wouldn't because it would be right side by side. And sometimes I's are bounceable, as I said. Those are part-time bouncers. Let's call them part-time bouncers. That's a that's a good terminology. So we won't bounce our I because it's right beside the part where you would bounce would be right beside the M. So just a downstroke and then to your next letter, or an exit stroke. And then let's bounce the N. And then G is one of those letters that has a descender line, so we won't bounce that because it's basically got a built-in bounce. And then that descender line, like that. And then you add your little dot. There we go. So that's dreaming. So that's how I would bounce dreaming. And you can see how my line for bouncing through that baseline is halfway between that baseline and the descender line. And then, as I said, it would be the same thing for bouncing letters above the X height. So the X height's the dotted line. I would break through the X height and bounce to this line that's halfway between the X height and that cap height. So you can see how I kind of did that on the R, and then here you can see that's where these little dot sits. So now let's try a more difficult word, one that I feel like takes a little trial and error to actually get right. Sometimes you have to actually practice a word and see it the way that it is to make a decision on how you actually like to bounce those letters. So one of the words I found difficult when I was practicing for this video, trying to figure out what things to explain and how to explain them, was the word believe. So let's just write believe out without any bounce. So I'm just going to quickly speed through that. So let's take a look now that I've written out believe without any bounce, and we can see it. How to work out when a word is difficult. When you look at this word, the only extremely bounceable letter is the B. So right in a row, besides the B, we have all of these letters here. The E is the one that 95% of the time you're not going to bounce it. Sometimes there's exceptions. So is this word an exception because there's 3 E's and because it's beside L, I's, and V's, which are kind of up in the air letters? Well, that's why you need to work this one out. So let's start out with the B. Okay, the B is extremely bounceable. So let's say we will definitely bounce that letter. So let's get that one done. Okay, so we've got our B, and then we won't bounce that E. So we don't bounce that E. So then now we get to L. Now, if we follow the simple rule that we're going to try to bounce every second letter, let's see what happens. And this is the rule you'll try to stand by, is every second letter or every second bounceable stroke. Screwed that up. Sorry, guys. Okay. So we bounce our L, and then we don't bounce our I, and then we have another E. And we are going to try to see if this word's an exception to the rule where we can bounce the E. So let's try that. And then V, we're not going to bounce because we just bounced that E. And now the last E, I guess, according to the rule of every second letter or every second bounceable stroke, we're going to bounce the E. So let's try that. Now, in my opinion, this does not look right. So here's an example of when that sort of guideline does not work, bouncing every second letter. It just doesn't look right. We have 2 different sized E's here that in the same word, and that's just not visually pleasing. And this tiny little V, it just looks a little strange, and I think you'll agree. So let's try to work that out. See, what can we do? How can we change this? So, okay, we know this is not an exception to bouncing E's. We want all of our E's to look consistent within this word, so we're not going to bounce the E's. Bouncing the L is a good idea because we have no bounce here, and we could choose to bounce the I instead of the L and have 1 letter bounce, 2 non-letter bounce this letter, but then we'll end up with 3 not bounced letters in a row. So let's try it. Let's try bouncing our B, our I, and our V. Let's try that. Okay, so as you can see, this looks a little bit better than the other one. Let's just get that sheet. I made a mistake, so I had to do it over. I'm not above mistakes, guys. Everybody makes mistakes. Nobody's perfect. But let's take a look. So This was my believe. Not right. That's not how you spell believe. So if you look at this one compared to this one already looks better. But maybe there's a way to make it look just a little bit better. I think that there is. Some words are just going to be difficult. You just got to practice and give them a go and see what works best. So this time what I'm going to do, instead of bouncing the I, I'm going to bounce the L. I'm going to bounce the B, the L, and the V. As I think the V in between these two non-bounced E's looks good, but I kind of feel like it's a little uneven. It's okay, but it could be better. So now, between our 3 attempts at believe, this is our first, second, third. So I think that this one, to me, looks like the most balanced one. And this one's not bad, it's pretty good. If you use this one, it would be fine. But it just goes to show how practicing really does help you to decide. Some words are just more difficult and you'll need to practice them to really decide how you're going to do it. And sometimes you'll make mistakes. So there you have it. That's how I approach balanced lettering, and I hope that this was helpful to you guys in learning how to do that, and that I give you some good examples and explained it in an understandable way. And if you have any questions about what I showed you in the video, please leave a comment in the comment section below this video. Now, go check out the description to find the worksheets I've prepared on balanced lettering for you guys so you guys can practice them and have fun. Well, that's it for this video, guys. I really hope that you liked it and that you will share it with your friends if you did. In the next video, we're going to be covering flourishes. And flourishes are those little twists, twirls, and curls that you often see in hand lettering at the beginning and end of words. And also sometimes people incorporate them into the middle of words just to add balance to designs and things like that. So that's what we're going to be doing in the next video. I hope to see you guys then. I hope you guys all have a super awesome day. Bye!